Hi, and welcome to the InterDrone podcast. I'm Mike Peel, and I'm here today with the CTO and co-founder of FlightWave Aerospace Systems, Trent Lukacek.
Hey, Mike. Thanks a lot. It's a real honor to be on your show today. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you too, because you have an awesome new drone that's, is it out or coming out?
We are just emerging from stealth, in fact. It's the FlightWave Edge, it is out and there for us to take a look at, and we'll have it here at InterDrone, and we're really excited to be showing it to everybody this year.
Well, cool. We'll get back into that a little bit later, but first I kind of wanted to get into your history, because it's pretty rich history. In aerospace engineering, you got a PhD in that at Stanford. That's where you met your co-founder, Mike Colano. You've done some work for Lockheed Martin and NASA. Those are huge names in the industry. And you have a unique experience utilizing drones for environmental impact assessment and conservation efforts. So I think that our audience will be really interested in hearing about that experience. But first, how did you get into drones in the first place?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I got into drones in a fairly twisty, windy path. It started with this experience. I got really lucky, fortunate to hop on a project that some of my friends at Stanford were doing at the time in 2013. Basically, we were looking for an excuse to go to a tropical place and take pictures and things like that. And so one of my colleagues came up with this really awesome idea that we should go and use a quadcopter and try to take pictures of coral reefs, and let's try to make maps of that. And there were some really interesting scientific and algorithmic ideas behind doing that, because, well, the water is an interesting thing to map, to say the least, because it's moving. We usually take advantage of still stuff over land, and it's kind of easy to stitch those images together.
But yeah, it doesn't move.
Anyway, long story short is we got an all expenses paid trip to Ofu, American Samoa. And it's a little island in the middle of the Pacific, and it took us 2 plane rides and a 2-hour boat ride to get to it. And once we got there, finally, after braving wind and rain and things like that, for about 10 days we were on this island, and I flew this quadcopter. It was a old 3DR DIY quadcopter, that old blue and black arm frame that you guys probably all remember.
Yeah, wow.
Way back when.
It seems like ancient times now. Now DJI and 3DR are friends, cats and dogs living together.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's such a big change. And I had about a month to throw all that together before we got on the airplane. So it's like, to say that this was a new experience was putting it gently. So
you felt the magic there. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again?
So you just were in love with it at that moment. You started to feel like this is something you really wanted to do with the rest of your time.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it was tough. While I was there, it was work, and it's kind of funny to think about. You're sitting on a beach, and it's tropical island with this beautiful water in front of you, and coral reef that you can go snorkeling in, see all these different animals in it. It's just beautiful setting. But you're here to work. You're here to put a quadcopter in the air and collect data. And that process, the collecting of the data with that quadcopter in that environment, was really, really hard. The vehicle itself, was flying on LiPo battery, and quadcopters, as you know, tend not to fly much longer than 10, 20 minutes. At the time, this quadcopter, with all the stuff we had on it, I basically had 10 to 12 minutes to get it back. Otherwise, it would be landing in the water.
Really tedious work.
I'm sorry?
Really tedious work, because you have to manage the batteries, and then you got to go back up in the air and get started where you left off.
Yeah, you know exactly what's going on. Definitely. Like that, the tedium, the stress of wondering if it's coming back, if I'm going to be able to get another transect in with this battery so that I can go home a little bit earlier. Yeah, that was all up there. And on top of that, with the danger below me, there was the danger above me too. The wind was often complicating. So, coming back from that experience, the gears in my head started turning, started asking how are we going to make this easier? Can I make this kind of mission easier? And that eventually led to what we're doing here. But back then it was more just like, oh, this could be an interesting problem to think about, and this is a cool little intersect intersection of technology and being out and able to go and travel and things like that. So, I often said back then, and kind of still do say it these days, is for me, in one respect, drones are an excuse to travel to tropical places. so that that's kind of my entry into drones. I had to build a quadcopter, had to go out to a reef, and coming back from that trip, this was in the middle of the summer. A couple friends and I started pulling together this plan to establish a UAV club at Stanford. And in fact, there's a colleague of mine, a fellow fellow graduate student who had kind of laid the groundwork in our department, the aerospace department, to have this club. And we had the support of the professors and things like that. And so then the goal was to turn it into a full-blown official and respected club on campus that was known for being that. And we were trying to drive a really funny intersection here, because a lot of the clubs on campus come out of the undergraduate departments, and we were trying to put an interesting spin here, where because graduate students tend to get stuck in the lab and
they never come out to play
very much. I thought one of the fun goals of that club was to give graduate students an outlet to be mentors, but also to build really cool technology just for the fun of it, to build drones, go and fly. So we established things like these weekly fly days. On Saturday, we would go out to Lake Wag and fly in the morning and before the wind picked up and things like that. And we were also bringing in guest speakers from the Bay Area, because the drone industry was getting really hot at that time. And 3DR came and gave us a little tech talk. DJI was there. The Skycatch, all sorts of different companies. We just had this awesome excuse to go and call up CEOs for all the Bay Area drone startups and say, "Hey, you want to come and give a talk at Stanford?"
And Stanford would be a draw to them, and vice versa. So that's
sure. Yeah.
What year was this again? This was.
We started pulling it off the ground in 2014.
2014.
And it still is today. I gave a talk there a few months ago, actually. As came around full circle. Now I was the one giving the talk.
Wow.
I think one of the proudest moments for me for that experience for the UAV club at Stanford was when we transferred leadership over to the next
passing of the torch.
Yeah, because I was starting to get into the mode of I got to graduate, I got to defend, I got to get my thesis done, and
you got to make work happen. I
got to hand this over to somebody else. Yeah.
What are some other ways that drones can help in environmental impact assessment? I was looking up some stuff on coastal stuff. So can it track erosion if it's used consistently? Red tide? I mean, those are just some ideas that popped into my head, but given you have more experience.
Sure, yeah. You've pulled up a lot of really good applications there already, erosion and red tide. In fact, there have been projects that have done that already, and what just as fascinating and maybe as impactful as the contribution it makes to the environment to be able to monitor that kind of stuff, also the technology that's needed to accomplish it is pretty interesting too. So, erosion is a pretty big one that I've seen opportunity for, especially at least within California. And this was a project that there was a project that was we'll call it prototyped actually recently, that was sponsored, run by, and in partnership with Drone Deploy and the Nature Conservancy. They were running this project they called Zones and Drones project, and it was during the La Nina last year, which we were kind of expecting in California a pretty large amount of rain. And what was fascinating about this project was it was a prototype in the idea of trying to crowdsource coastal erosion monitoring using drones and phones, but drones especially. And the basic idea was, hey, after a big rainstorm, if you have a quadcopter, you should go out to the places where you're allowed to fly, of course, along the coast, and try to make some maps
and upload them to a common database.
Yeah, and all that data was uploaded and is available and was process by the Nature Conservancy to see if there's anything interesting that we could pull out of it. I think what was really tricky, what was kind of tricky about that project was the amount of data that
I was just going to say the volume's got to be out of control.
Sure.
Especially the higher the resolution, the better the output you'll get off the study. But then there's also probably a lot of bad pictures that people submit, and that has to be sorted.
Yeah, the quality of data is always an interesting thing, especially when you're crowdsourcing, and also just getting repeatable time points is also something that becomes really important. And if the quality of data is not there from a scientific standpoint, it becomes really tricky. So but as a concept, I thought that was really cool, and maybe someday we'll be able to be running with the amount of with the proper amount of support, maybe from California government or from an organization like the Nature Conservancy, that there could be a project someday that is tasked with repeatedly taking a drone out, which brings the cost of this whole project down, and repeatedly monitoring a high-risk area for erosion to see how is the coast changing, and then the extensions that come out of erosion also are what is being eroded. It's not just sand, it's not just soil, but there's also runoff that's coming higher up on the hill there. So
California with the mudslides, right? So the ground is loose there.
Yeah, and there's even things like chemicals that come off from pesticides and herbicides, and then all the other chemicals that we used to get around during the day, like gasoline, for example, oil, things that are on the road, that all gets washed away and then ends up in the ocean one way or another.
Yeah, wow, I never even thought of it that way. It's so simple and logical. Yeah.
Yeah. California doesn't have that big of an issue, but there are some parts of the U.S., especially along the Mississippi. In fact, there's a huge plume of ammonia that comes from all the fertilizer in the Farm Belt that just makes its way out into the Gulf of Mexico. So like you can run the drone up the hill around California and go take a look at what's going on there, but you can also run the drone out to the water and start looking at the plume that the runoff makes from erosion. And so that's where you're talking about red tide. Even just the color of the water changes during a big erosion event, and you can see this green plume that is the dirt and the sand that is kind of making its way out into the water. And the scale of that plume is actually kind of baffling if you take a close look at it. And what is kind of really cool, and where drones sit in a really fun intersection of technology and impact and scale in terms of price, is that the resolution needed to make interesting assessment, make a useful assessment of all these things, gets down to a pretty fine resolution, and we can't count on satellites to take care of that. And we can't count on satellites to be able to image every day.
Yeah, consistently. Yeah, beyond cloud cover, exactly. So, you were just, when we were doing the test audio earlier, you were talking about the fog in Santa Monica. So, common in California would be the marine layer that comes in the morning, which would obviously block satellite, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and so being able to operate in the fog and still collect data, like there's a idea of robustness here, like we're chasing the nines of reliability from generating our data, that perspective. So the drones sit in a really awesome space for that. And
cheaper than flying a helicopter, which would cost in gasoline alone, right?
Yeah.
So this is a type of operation that would never exist for a helicopter. It's really a space that only drone technology, which will inevitably get cheaper and more efficient to fill it.
Yeah, that's definitely how it's looking. And this kind of project, how do we coming from the perspective of, okay, it looks like drones could make a really cool impact here. What is the right way? What kind of technology, what kind of drone is needed to service this? And so the first answer, of course, is let's put a quadcopter in the air, and that it's a great way to get started. The shortcomings of a quadcopter's endurance and range start rearing its head really quickly when you're worried about mapping large areas of the coast or the ocean.
They're also slow. They don't move fast.
Slow. Yeah, definitely. So this is kind of like where some of the inspiration for the edge starts showing up. It's like, let's say we want to do a coastal erosion, or like a really serious coastal erosion study. What kind of vehicle do we want? It has to be an airplane, like just based on the scope of the area that we need to hit. It has to be an airplane because of we need to fly for a long time and fly over a lot of area. But a lot of the times we're operating from cliffs and like out of the back of a car even, and we don't really have a runway to bring the airplane back.
Mm-hmm.
We can hand launch it, sure, but bringing it back is the tricky part. It's the hardest part about flying an airplane and in my opinion, at least, why fixed-wing drones have had a longer lead time in terms of adoption. The quadcopters took off so quickly, right? Because they're easy to take off and land.
Yeah, they're like duct tape. They're really easy to just pull off the shelf and solve a problem. But as far as like an actual planned response to things, they're not always the best tool.
Yeah, so you kind of get a sense where, okay, we need an airplane, and we need something that takes off vertically. So you start seeing some of the inspiration for the edge starts showing up, and then you stop. And I guess the other facets that start showing up on the edge, like being able to deal with wind and rain and things like that, being able to pack out really quickly, that's where the idea of it, like just the coastal erosion study, like that is.
That's a shining example of what inspired your latest frame. So what you have a modular sensor system, right? So you could just switch out types of cameras, infrared, multispectral, or I'm sorry, you could. There's a FLIR thermal that you could put in there too. You know what? Why don't you talk about the drone? Like, what inspired the features? It sounds like you've already talked about one problem or pain point that you were trying to solve with the. A fixed wing design that could take off nearly from anywhere, or at least a short runway. But what inspired the other features? What were the problems you were trying to solve with those?
Yeah, and we can come at this even from your first question with like what kind of interesting environmental things are there for us to look at, because we've just identified like erosion as one, and a lot of that can be handled with mapping with color cameras, but something like red tides, or maybe just to add on that, something we've done in the past as well with the edge is monitoring ocean temperature, sea surface temperature, and there's lots of really interesting reasons for that we can get into. But like if we want to go from mapping something with a color camera to mapping something with a thermal camera, then bar none, one fundamental requirement is we need to be able to swap these payloads out, and we need to be able to swap them out really easily. So going from a color camera to a thermal camera should just be as simple as switching out a lens on your DSLR camera. And
changing a light bulb.
Ended up being, I'm sorry?
Like changing a light bulb, just twists in your lock and you're good to go.
Yeah, definitely. Lock and loaded, yeah. So we ended up spending a lot of time thinking about that interface and how we can make it easy to install and swap. And I think that what was really tricky is balancing the need to be an airplane with the need to be able to have a really wide open, flexible payload bay. That's a lot harder. That was a lot harder than I expected when we started trying to design that. Because like you start with rails and anyway, I'm starting to nerd about the engineering.
Oh, that's okay. Trust me, the audience is all hardware nerds. They like going deep into this stuff. Keep in mind, the audience for our show started out in those DIY drones forums, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
A lot of them are tinkerers, makers. There's a subset that are entrepreneurs, and they might get bored by the engineering stuff. But as far as the people flying the drones, they want to hear you nerd out. So go for it.
Cool. I think the ocean especially asks for some really interesting payloads. Just coming from to share the little bits of pieces of what I've seen from that world and playing and swimming in it. Color cameras are going to be one of the bread and butters, but thermal camera becomes really important too. So like one study that we did was trying to track thermal fronts, which is this concept that you have a really big change in something. And in the case that we were looking at was temperature changes. It's pretty similar to the idea of like an atmospheric front, where like if the front comes through, you can expect the weather to change and things like that. And what's interesting in the ocean is that life, that biology, that plankton and whales and fish like to hang out around fronts. There's this really awesome coalescence of life that happens around, especially the thermal front, because that's where the plankton like to hang out, because it's kind of like being able to adjust the temperature of the faucet when you're in your shower. You have two hands, you can turn each the hot and cold knobs on your own, but plankton or fish or whales, they live in, they want their comfortable temperature too, and the way they do that is finding these fronts that they can swim back and forth in.
They ride the tide.
Yeah.
And what's the survivable or livable environment for them?
Yeah, and what ends up happening is life brings life in the sense of from the standpoint of a food chain, like plankton bring the fish, which bring the bigger fish, which bring the killer whales and things like that. So
yeah, they're all trying to conserve their own energy, right? So yeah, it starts from the plankton and goes all the way up to the giant whale. Interesting.
Yeah. The thermal, like as far as the payloads over the water, then like a really high grade thermal camera that can take accurate radiometric temperatures is another really interesting thing that you can fly over the water. What gets really out on the edge there is these really important studies that could be done that could come from the standpoint of flying a hyperspectral camera. So,
what's a hyperspectral camera? Because I'm pretty sure not everybody knows what that is yet.
One way to think about what is awesome about drones is that there's a 3-axis set of performance metrics you can look at, and that is resolution in space, time, and wavelength of light. In space, we can, with the drone, increase our resolution, our pixel, like how many meters, centimeters, millimeters is in a pixel of our map or of our camera. We can push that really small with a drone, but we can also do it at high frequency, meaning we can come out and make that high resolution pixel many times a day. We can come and fly the drone many times a day.
So we can make different types of interpretations or interpolations of that pixel to get a better understanding of what that pixel means within the context of the data.
There's some really cool studies you could do if you had a time history over the day. For example, I'll go back to erosion, like how hour by hour, how did the little stream evolve into a big river, which can happen in some of the parts of the California coast. So that's just like one vignette of things you could do if you had an hour by hour time history of the whole map of the SLART area. Similar to how Google they published some of their time histories of their satellite imagery, month on month, and you get some really cool features that show up in that. And you can see cities grow and shrink. You can see rivers get smaller or lakes get bigger. Coming from an environmental standpoint, you can watch glaciers get smaller, which ends up being kind of sad to watch, but you have to monitor it one way or another.
Yeah, basically, you're watching the planet breathe. It's got to be awe-inspiring to think about.
That's an awesome way to think about it.
Let's not get too far off hyperspectral, because I'm not sure we clearly defined that. So hyperspectral summary. No, it's okay.
I wanted to back into it from the standpoint of we have these interesting features of resolution that a drone can push in space and time and wavelength of light, meaning, and this is where hyperspectral shows up, is that, we traditionally think of flying a color camera, but there's all these awesome sensors out there that are becoming smaller and cheaper, partly because of the drone industry, in fact, is that increases our resolution and wavelength of light. So coming at us from a color camera, we can go, which sits around in the visible spectrum of light. You can walk to longer wavelengths and start imaging infrared. You can walk to higher wavelengths and start imaging UV, or within the visible spectrum, you can start cutting up what that color camera is looking at into really fine chunks of the light, meaning example, you take a picture and you're looking at a color picture, but in fact you have 6 pictures under there that you could represent in black and white in grayscale. And each one of those 6 pictures that you get back from your camera, each one of those 6 pictures is telling you how much light it saw in this really narrow band. Let's call it from 500 to 505 nanometers of wavelength. That picture is telling you how much that camera saw in that wavelength. And so if you put all those together, you get to do some really interesting biology. And where hyperspectral tries to take this is to say, instead of having 6 pictures on my visible spectrum, I want to have a 100. I want to have 100 pictures that for each picture I know basically how much light was between 500 and 501 nanometers. And what's incredible about having that information is now you can start generating spectrographs. And spectrographs you can use to infer what kind of materials and you're looking at, what kind of biology you're looking at. You can start classifying the types of species that you're looking at just on that spectral signature and what light it's reflecting.
Literally what light they're reflecting. See if I could clarify this for maybe the people that got a little bit lost or might have gotten lost in that. I mean, I love nerding out on stuff like that. So basically, you're cutting up the visible spectrum, Roy G. Biv, into little subsections that are so small that they're probably smaller than the sensitivity of the human eye to even perceive them. But by putting them into a spectrograph, you can start to interpret things from that data, such as which life forms are there based off of which type of light they're even reflecting.
Yeah. And maybe I can put, since we're still trying to define hyperspectral in a quick way, I guess. Well, we hear these terms, like maybe we'll take another cut at this, we hear all these terms, multispectral, hyperspectral, like what exactly does this mean? Multispectral multispectral and hyperspectral kind of sit on a spectrum, in their same sense. There's no like hard threshold between multi and
one's just a higher resolution of the other, right? Hyperspectral is cutting it down even more than multispectral, which, like, for example, multispectral, you might take only things within the green bandwidth and then remap that to a Roy G. Biv output. So somebody like me looking at the map can get an idea of what's going on with vegetation, right? So hyperspectral, you're just saying, is a whole other extra layer below that in density.
Yeah, you're pushing the resolution that you're looking at on the wavelength of light. Instead of each pixel being really small, like you're able to see a leaf in your picture, the resolution is so fine in space that you can see a leaf. The resolution in light that you're looking at, you can start identifying what type of leaf that is, or what's the health status of that leaf. So over the water, where this gets really interesting is whether you can start finding where the fish are hanging out, for example. And if you know where the fish are hanging out, then you probably know where all the fishers are hanging out. You know where the fishers are hanging out, and you're trying to keep an eye on the health of your fishery, that it's not being overfished, that it's not being fished illegally, then that becomes really important to track. And so where hyperspectral could fit in there is for us to be able to really finely track what's on the surface of the water, and that lets us hunt down some really important biology that we could use to take care of our environment better.
I mean, that's a pretty awesome use case, and that's one of the things that I've been inspired. We've been doing InterDrone this is our 3rd year, and what I first imagined was just, drones being sent up for taking pretty pictures, or for cinematography, and I had an idea of, search and rescue, but on the scientific end of things, it's just impressive that we're really getting a new lens on the world. It's a new form of interpretation that, as Chris Anderson had said at our first show, is really as inspiring as the birth of the internet. I mean, he's a TED talker, so he could drop lines like that, not even half kidding. But I really do think there is a lot of truth to that, in that we're seeing things being developed that you could not imagine literally 2 or 3 years ago, and we're reshaping the world with them. All right, now that we've taken a look into the core technology, so what does this mean on the functional end of things? How are users going to use them? What are some paths forward with that data that they're collecting?
Yeah, sure. So one of the simple entry points, I guess, in coming over from quadcopter space is having an eye in the sky, a camera that can stably image and take video of stuff, of people, of assets, of the ocean, of illegal activity. So I guess as far as what the use cases are, like if you swap on a gimbal color camera, which has real-time video stream back and things like that, then you can use FlightWave Edge to keep an eye on the sky for a really long time. As cruising as an airplane, you're able to cruise fixed wing style for up to 2 hours, and that lets you get a lot of situational awareness if you're coming from that part of the drone application. So it becomes a point where the vehicle is a platform in the sky that you can trust that it's going to be there. And after minute 20, you start realizing your interaction with the drone changes. It becomes a fundamentally different experience for you as the pilot, because now you're not the horizon of you trying to plan for your quadcopter to come back kind of goes away, and now you're thinking about what am I trying to do for this mission? I have all this overhead and time. I can do a lot of really cool things. Let's go and put the drone over here, or let's go put the drone over here. Let's take a closer up picture of that. We have another 60 minutes to take care of this, so let's take care of it. The interaction with the tool, with the asset, with the FlightWave Edge becomes really different from that standpoint, from the piloting standpoint. It's not something you have to worry about whether it's going to come back or when I have to bring it back. It's more I have some work to get done, and let's get it done.
So what's the flight time that you're boasting for this airframe?
As a fixed wing aircraft on electric here, it's cruise time for 2 hours. So that's our endurance. That's
astounding. Coming from the world of quadcopters, 20-30 minute flight max. It's like you said, it's an entirely different frame of mind operating the drone at that longer interval.
Yeah, the flying longer is an important part, and the edge we put together to fly faster, longer, stronger, and yeah, it stays up in the air for 2 hours, but it also is flying pretty fast for a drone, at least against a quadcopter. It's flying at 15 meters a second. That's its nominal cruising speed. It's flying at 15 meters a second, 30 miles an hour or so. But you can also fly faster if you're willing to cut into your flight time. You can get this thing way up to 20, 22, 25 meters a second. That's when we started, pulling the throttle back because the airframe was showing, we'll call it Aeroelastic Flutter. So the vehicle flies fast. It flies for a long time, and with all the things that we were talking about with operating in tough environments, we also had to build it so that it could withstand water and wind. It's built stronger from that standpoint. You don't have to be worried about spilling your coffee on it, I guess we'll put, but more precisely, being able to put it up in the air on a rainy day or a foggy day. And one of our visions when we set out for this vehicle too is for it to be able to land in the water. Right now, the Edge is not fully waterproof, but we're getting really close to that, and I think by the end of 2018, we'll be delivering waterproof vehicles. So for now, we call it weatherproof. It's able to fly in the rain and things like that.
So we're getting close to the edge of time here to cut things off, but I wanted to get your perspective on the future of the drone market, or I guess just what drones will be used for in the next 3 months, 6 months, year, and into infinity. So I mean, you obviously have the expertise. So where do you see things going?
Well, the drone industry as a whole, I think, has a lot of awesome innovation going on, and I'm really thrilled and honored to be part of that community. And I guess what I'm hoping to see the industry do is to build an awesome ecosystem of capability that establishes that the drone technology is on the other side of the hype curve, that we're in the stage of steady progress, where everybody's building on each other's really awesome technology to push, I guess, the eye in the sky, or the humanity's capability from the standpoint of observing its environment to some really never before seen capabilities. I guess from the 3 month horizon, for me personally, my 3 month horizon is getting the edge out. The edge is, I hope, will fit into the industry, and I believe will be an awesome addition to the industry from the standpoint of providing some really fantastic capabilities at a price that scales well, meaning that industry or corporate entities or environmental entities, people that are trying to run nonprofits, for example, are able to buy not one but multiple and build a fleet of edges. And I guess that kind of factors into what I would call the 1 year vision, is that we've scaled a fleet that ends up enabling some really interesting capabilities, we'll call it, from kind of the swarm perspective, meaning that if we have not one but multiple vehicles that we count on to be in the air for a very long time, how can we scale that? How can we do more with multiple vehicles? And so let's partition up a mapping project. Like we have one project that we're talking about here to keep a close look on an island. It's a fairly large island that we think we can do with the edge if we fly 3 of them at once, and it'll be done in a day. So that's the kind of thing I see coming, is let's start putting multiple vehicles together and fly them at the same time. And then even in the same vein, and one of the things that we've been working on with collaborators and around the world really, is the ability to interface something like the edge, the FlightWave Edge, with multiple not aerial vehicles, with vehicles that float, we'll call them autonomous surface vessels, and vehicles that swim under the water, autonomous underwater vehicles. And so there's these really cool techniques and really cool, just from a technology standpoint, infrastructure and communication protocols that need to be built so that this flying vehicle can talk and interact and amplify the projects that requires a surface vessel or an underwater vessel. And so it takes us, coming from the ocean world at least, it takes us towards this vision of wiring the ocean. Of all the things that we have on the planet here, the ocean is by far the biggest, but also the least known. And so I'm hoping that the FlightWave Edge will fit into that from the standpoint of being able to enable us to wire the ocean.
Well, that sounds awesome. I think there's a lot of opportunity in like oil and gas. They already run automated drones under the water, right? And then a lot of farming equipment is already automated, more so than I guess the general public would assume. And having this extra eye in the sky, it really is like the last piece to the puzzle for flawless data collection. And let's hope that beyond visual line of sight starts to shake out regulatory-wise or regulation-wise.
It's funny you mention that. It's another reason we like the ocean environment, just purely from a logistics standpoint. It's after a certain point, or if you're sitting on a boat in international water, then you get to go for a very long way. So I guess maybe I'll put this more proper way. And one of the things that's really the side benefit we'll put flying over the ocean is that line of sight rules have not been fleshed out there yet, and so at least within the legal framework we have today, that it's well within our right if we're beyond a certain distance from the ocean for us to fly way beyond line of sight. So that's fun. It lets us stretch our wings.
Yeah, it leaves room for experimentation, and that could always be brought to land later when the laws are figured out. Anyway,
it's also like when you're trying out really crazy technology, which FlightWave Edge is definitely our entry, and we have a lot of really crazy ideas that are coming down the pipeline after this. But the ocean becomes a really safe place to test that if you can trust that your airframe is going to stay in the air, because there's less stuff around, I guess. And if you come down in the water, and you recover it, then the damage to people, to things, to the environment is very minimal. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet you. You're coming to InterDrone, right? Or is it just the team?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm excited to be there.
All right. I guess the podcast listeners can come meet you at InterDrone too. You and the FlightWave team will be there September 6th through 8th. And they can take a look. Are you bringing the Edge along with you?
Yeah, we'll be there. Be happy to talk about it. And we're really excited to show it to the world.
Sweet. So, yeah, you'll be able to get hands-on with the Edge if you come down to Trent's booth, which is the FlightWave booth at InterDrone. Yeah, I guess that's it for today. It was a pleasure talking with you, and thanks for being an awesome first podcast. I think it was very informative, and everybody got a lot out of it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. I really appreciate being here and having the chance to chat with you. If anybody wants to find out more about the Edge, you can always check out our website at flightwave.aero. And looking forward to chatting with you all out on the floor at InterDrone. All the engineers, all the developers, all the pilots, manufacturers. Let's get some of these cool minds all together and see what we can do.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, man. So I'll see you there. Goodbye, everybody.